All right, welcome everybody to Making the Familiar Strange. I am Jeremy Fricke. I'm Education Director at Trifaith Initiative, and we are going to be discussing Job with Ben Mazur today. Really quickly, I'm going to share a couple things before we get started. All right, so firstly, this program has two goals. Okay, firstly, we want to study Abrahamic scriptural stories alongside each other. We're really trying to bring out different perspectives and learn how to take others' perspectives or new perspectives by looking at these stories that are sometimes shared, sometimes they're not. We can all connect to the various Abrahamic stories that we talk about in this program, though. Most of the time we have a lay leader from one of the Trifaith congregations leading the conversation, both teaching us a little bit about their perspective with some depth, as well as helping some of the discussion as we go through together. And just a few ground rules here. Please be as respectful as possible as we're having discussion. Challenge your own assumptions. Speak from your own point of view. And as we are discussing today, there is no wrong answer. We are really trying to see a bunch of points of view from all of you, and some depth in particular from Ben today, so that we can kind of practice those skills that we were talking about, practicing understanding scriptures as well as seeing things from different points of view. So without further ado, I would love to introduce Ben Mazur, who is the Director of Congregational Learning at Temple Israel. Is that correct? Did I say that right?
Yes.
All right. And I will let you take it away. And if you need anything from me, please let me know.
Hey, well, hello, everyone. And thank you so much for joining. Before we jump in, I want to give a little bit of contextual background to my view of the story that we're diving into today. The Hebrew Bible is split up into three sections. We start with Torah, right? The 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, like really the story of who it starts with creation and then moves into who the Israelites are and their journey into and out of slavery and into a promised land and a fulfillment of God's covenant. Then that's only the first section of the Hebrew Bible. Next, we have the stories of the prophets. And these are the kings. These are the stories of great epic battles and prophecies that some of which may be fulfilled, some that we're still waiting for the world to be redeemed, a lot of acknowledgement of the brokenness of the world and the things that we must do to make it better and what it means to live in a society that's dedicated to God. And then at the end, we have the Ketuvim, the writings. And the writings, depending on which Jewish scholar you ask, has a different purpose for different people. Job is a story that my personal belief is not one that's meant to be taken as literal canon, right? It's not part of the Israelite narrative the way that so many other stories from the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament are. This is, in essence, a morality play. And what I mean by that's a form of drama that was really popular in the 15th and 16th centuries where characters represented key values and virtues in attempt to give the audience a moral. Right, we see values in conflict with each other, and we see a main character be pulled towards good or towards evil, but in the end, typically finds some kind of redemption and finds his way back to holiness, back to God, back to mainstream society, whatever that looked like from the perspective of the storyteller. Job encounters a few different people along his path. who, uh, three of which pull him in one specific direction, one more that pushes him in another, and culminates with this interaction with God. I wouldn't call it face to face. God appears in the form of a tempest, is what we're told. A lot of people have heard of Job and know a little bit of pieces about Job. I came into this, I didn't want to make the assumption that everyone had the opportunity to fully read through. So we're going to talk about some of these story aspects together. Thank you to those who did, or if you've read it in the past. I want this conversation kind of be open. If there's a perspective or a question you want to offer at any point, please interrupt, throw up, if you know how to raise a hand in the chat, or just write a question in the chat box. This isn't by any means a lecture. This is a conversation I'm hoping that we're able to have. But first I want to give us kind of a mini version of the story of Job. What I'm about to show has a little, it's animated, but does contain a little bit of gore and blood, however, is quite tame compared to the actual writing of the story of Job. So just kind of an advanced content warning on that. Give me just 1 second. I don't know how many folks here are fans or viewers of the show South Park. The creators of the show are known for having a pretty skeptical view of religion and faith in general. However, when they tell stories from scriptures, they do a very accurate job. Their entire episode telling the, I guess, the beginning of Mormonism is like very accurate to the actual story. Like, even though they are critical of Mormonism throughout, they still tell an accurate story. And they do the same thing with Scientology. Like it's something that they do. They tell the truth and then they make fun of it. So this is what I would say a pretty accurate telling to not the entire book of Job, but just the opening of it. So why don't we start here? The book of Job opens with this conversation between God and, depending on your interpretation of it, this idea of Satan, which in Hebrew, ha-satan, it means the accuser, or the adversary, right? The idea of Satan in Judaism is not a devilish figure by any means. It's this personality that challenges people. And in this sense, we're starting with this idea that Satan and God have a conversation. So let me just kind of open it up to the group and just think about this idea of God and Satan in conversation with each other. I'm not an expert in, I wouldn't even say I'm fully an expert in Jewish scriptures, but definitely not in Christian and Islamic scriptures. So I just going to kind of open it up. Does this happen anywhere else where we have a direct conversation between God and a challenger, right? Whether it's a force for evil or just any kind of figure that's pushing back? Like, does this come up anywhere else?
It comes up in the book of Genesis, doesn't it? There, when he curses the serpent.
Yeah, it's not so much a conversation, my understanding of it, right? The serpent in the garden that tempts Eve with the fruit of knowledge is also called ha-satan, and then God punishes the serpent for his deeds. There isn't so much a two-way conversation there, but yeah, it is a form of interaction. So yeah, I think that is a good example.
And can I say something? Hi everyone. In Islam, there is a similar conversation in the creation of Adam and Eve as well, between Satan and God, where he actually more than once. Once is when God creates Adam and Eve, and then asks Satan to bow down to them, and then Satan refuses. He says, "I will not bow down because he's made of clay and I'm made of fire. I'm better than him." And then another time, and then God tells him to get out of the kingdom. And another time is, and he says, I will lead all your creation astray. Yeah, that's one of the times.
Thank you. And we have a couple comments in the chat box. Jesus has an argument with Satan. Jason brings up that there are points where humans have arguments with God, and there's a little bit of a back and forth, almost like a negotiation. What's interesting here is that this isn't a negotiation. This is a bet. And again, from the context of this is a story, in my perspective, if we look at it as a piece of literature that was written by humans to tell a morality story, and not so much Word of God itself. Looking at it, like this kind of feels to me like one of those 1990s teen movies where two rival jocks make a bet with each other about who can score the girl, who can get the date to the dance, who can win the starting spot on the football team, right? God is bragging. This is a boastful depiction of God, right? Which is a trait that we're told as humans, I know in several different faiths, we're told don't be that person, right? We're not supposed to brag. We're not supposed to be boastful. We're not supposed to have, right? Like we can be overcome with pride, right? That's a dangerous thing. And in this moment, it's a characteristic that God is portraying. Have you seen my servant Job? He is so good to me, right? Like that's I've scored the date to the dance, right? Job is my date. Job is with me. And Hasatan, the adversary, the accuser, Satan, however you want to view this other persona, says, oh, it's only because you've given him so much. Job has this wonderful family and this wonderful life. If you took it all away, he would curse your name. I guarantee it. And so God, for whatever reason, says, okay, fine, let's prove it. Let's place a bet. I bet you that I could take all those things away and Job will still stick by me. And in this short 2-minute segment we looked at, that's what happens. Job stays with God, right? The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, which is like that's a theme that comes up in a lot of religious speeches. Fall back on those ideas that we owe everything we have to God. I'm not entirely sure that I personally agree with that sentiment, but that's what's being told here. But that's only the beginning. So let me bring up, let's take a little bit of a look at kind of the structure of the way that this story is put together. So what we've heard so far is the prologue, right? This conversation between God and Satan, and really what happens to Job is all part of this prologue. It's just the introduction to the story. After that, we get this monologue from Job where he says, everything's been taken from me. Blessed is God. This must be the will of God. But please, God, if you've taken everything else away already, I would also ask that you take my life. Right? And in this moment, Job is putting his life in God's hands and still recognizing, right, and still believing that everything that is given by God. And he's just asking, God, just please just end this for me too, because I'm in a lot of pain. And so he's almost begging God for mercy in a way by saying that he wants to die. Death does not come to him, and he continues to suffer. And so he has these 3 friends who show up. I put friendly in quotes because these are not good friends, and we'll dive into who they are and what they talk about. And I'll also talk about what I mean by gaslighting, that this is a very clear moment of Job's friends enforcing their own personal viewpoints and beliefs onto him in a way that causes some severe psychological damage. After this, we have these reflections. We're also going to dive into a little bit of these poetics today, and just kind of there's a lot of philosophy about the state of the world and why things happen, right? This is a story that comes up whenever the question is asked, why do bad things happen to good people? And like that's what was happening in the South Park clip. For those who haven't seen the show before, in that particular episode, Kyle, who is a Jewish boy and feels that he's a good person, is in the hospital. He's sick, while his friend, who's a wicked child, is receiving all these rewards and this wealth. And he keeps questioning, he's having this existential crisis of why, when I've been a good person, am I suffering while this wicked person is benefiting? And so Job asks the same question, just in a quite poetic kind of way. Then God shows up and has some very intense words for Job and Job's friends and for all of us as readers. And then the story ends, that should be a 6 there with the epilogue. But the story ends with everyone getting what they deserve, coming back to this as much of a happy ending as one could get after losing their home and their family and their crops and their animals and all of these things. So let's talk about Job's friends. We have these cycles. So Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar each get a couple chances to tell Job what they think. And Zophar doesn't even get his third turn because by this point Job's had enough of it and kind of lashes out at all of them. But let's kind of talk about this. Job's friends come to him and they all consider themselves pious. They consider themselves good people. They consider themselves wise individuals who know the ways of the world and the ways of God and what God wants from them. And all three of them approach Job with this message. Job is sitting there saying, I am a good person. These bad things are happening to me anyway. God is the giver and taker of all things. God is giving and taking from me. I am a good person. So clearly at this point, Job's thinking, God is no longer giving and taking based on virtue. Job feels, I don't deserve this right now. He doesn't blame God for it. Well, I guess he's blaming God by saying, like, God is the one doing this to me, but it's not a punishment because I've done nothing to be punished for. And then Job's friends essentially put him on trial, or in a way accuse him of putting God on trial. And they say, if this is happening to you, then you obviously deserve it. If we all can agree that God is just and God does what is deserved, then you deserve this right now. And that is a really tough perspective. And it's one that we've kind of seen throughout history, right? And especially in extremist religious groups, right? It's a really tough thing to overcome, especially if you're raised believing that God rewards the good and punishes the wicked. So I want to talk a little, just share a little bit about. This is one of my favorite websites. Your Logical Fallacy Is. That takes you through all the things that people will try to throw out in a conversation. Like anytime you're debating, you can watch any political debate and every single one of these will come up at some point. But Job's friends are guilty of begging the question. It's a circular argument where the conclusion is based on the question itself, right? God punishes bad people. God is punishing you. Therefore, you must be a bad person because you are being punished, which doesn't prove anything. It's based entirely on that assumption, right? There's no proof that God only punishes bad people. They're making the assumption that God does, and therefore you must be a bad person. Right? I like this example here. Circular reasoning is bad, mostly because it's not very good. The conclusion is part of the assumption itself. Right. So let's talk about this. Who feels like they have a good idea of, who can define for us what gaslighting is?
Isn't it when you like make someone think that they're mentally ill or something's wrong with them or they're not like well, but really they're fine and you're just like tricking them into thinking so?
There's definitely one version of it. It's a form of psychological manipulation, where it's usually applied when talking about a relationship, and that can be a friendship, it can mean a partnership of a romantic or non-romantic kind. But any time where you have two people who should be in a trusting relationship and one person manipulates the other into thinking that something is wrong with them. This can come from straight out lies, right? Like someone saying to another person, like, you didn't do this thing that I told you you needed to do, but they didn't actually tell them, right? There's a lot of, you forgot to do this thing. There's a lot of, you hurt me even when that person hadn't done anything wrong. It's meant to turn another person to kind of get someone else to submit, right? To feel and be in such a low place about themselves that they let someone else dominate their lives. My personal feeling is that Job's friends are guilty of at least attempting to gaslight him in this situation. I think it's debatable whether they succeed. But these are not good friends. They're trying to convince Job that he is a bad person. When, like, we know, at least if we trust the narrator of the story, Job has done nothing wrong. And Job continues to say, I've done nothing wrong. I've done nothing wrong. And the friends say, oh, you must have. And they have no specific examples to give him, but you are a bad person. And we're just telling you that as your friend. We're telling you this because we care about you, that you're a bad person and you need to fix yourself and find redemption and apologize to God. And that can be, it's a rough thing. Like, this story is so rough. Like, all these bad things have already happened to him, and his so-called friends, they're providing nothing for him. There's no consolement. Someone emailed us this morning asking a question about in the book of Job, how there's kind of no regard given to Job's family. Like, they just die and no one mourns them, right? The family and the animals, like, there's so much death and destruction. And Job's response is, God is great. And Job's friend's response is, Job is evil. And there's no empathy. There's no remorse here. And when we're talking about this idea of when bad things happen to good people, how do we respond to them? How do we reach out and be a good friend and a good neighbor to be able to say, you know, I support you. I want to help you. Not, I want to make you feel worse than you already are, right? Just like kicking Job when he's already down. It's really sad what's going on in the story. All right, we're gonna dive into a little bit more of a formal text study on this. We're gonna read a little bit and then break out into some smaller groups so that we can talk a little more openly to each other and give everyone a chance to reflect. Here's just kind of my general guidelines for this. If you don't feel comfortable sharing, you don't have to. If you feel like you need to listen to others to gain more knowledge and wisdom, please, by all means, do. And if you have something to say, this is a safe space to say it, right? We're all here to learn from each other and show respect to each other. So I encourage you to, if this is not your comfort zone, see if you can find a way to step into it. And if not, totally okay, judgment free. So we're gonna read something all together, and then we'll split out. Also, if you're in a place where you can't talk right now, then that's fine. Just let your group know that And feel free to type to people also if that's something that you're going to be able to do. So here is Job's response. If I can have a volunteer, just so I'm not the only voice being heard throughout this, if someone can volunteer to just read this for us. Or read a
I'll
little.
volunteer. This is Carrie.
Thanks, Carrie.
Job again took up his theme and said, "Should I, who has embittered my life, as long as there is life in me and God's breath is in my nostrils, my lips will speak no wrong, nor my tongue utter deceit. Far be it from me to say you are right. Until I die, I will maintain my integrity. I persist in my righteousness and will not yield. I shall be free of reproach as long as I live. May my enemy be as the wicked, my assailant as the wrongdoer. For what hope has the impious man when he is cut down, when God takes away his life? Will God hear his cry when trouble comes upon him? When he seeks the favor of Shaddai, calls upon God at all times? I will teach you what is in God's power, and what is with Shaddai I will not conceal. All of you have seen it, and I'm sorry, I'm a little bit masked on my last word there, last sentence. Your face is in the way.
All of you have seen it, so why talk nonsense? Is how that ends. Thank you, Carrie. Just for those who don't know, Shaddai is one of many, many names for God in the Hebrew Bible. It's a little bit of source theory, like different people wrote different parts of the Bible at different times, and there's a lot of theory about you can tell around what time period it was written based on the names that are used, and so that using the word Shaddai kind of helps us place it amongst other scriptures and writings. But Job's standing up for himself here. Job's not allowing himself to be put down by his friends. So this is why I'd say, although his friends are attempting to gaslight him, he's not having any of it. He is sticking to his truth. And this is who I am. I am not going to change that. I've done nothing wrong. And this idea, may my enemy be as the wicked, my assailant, the wrongdoer. And what's going to happen when God takes away his life? Will God hear the cry for mercy from him? And kind of this, we're all equal in the end, right? This is Job saying, doesn't matter. I'm going to be a good person no matter what, but that still seems to not change how God's going to treat me in the end. And he's saying it kind of matter-of-factly, like this is just how it is. Like he feels like he's learning something about the nature of God and the nature of the world. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do, we're going to break out into groups, let's say groups of 4 or so. Jeremy or whoever's running the meeting, if you can organize that. If you have either a Bible or an online source, and I'll go ahead and put the Safaria link into the chat. Give me 1 second. Job chapter 28. We're going to split up into groups, read through this kind of short bit. We're going to spend 10 minutes in groups and read through lines 12 to 28. And you don't necessarily have to answer this question, but I want you to kind of have it in the back of your head to kind of frame the conversation. Ask each other questions. Find, like, say, this is what stands out to me, things that you notice. So this is where we get into the poetics. Like Job is done listening to other people, and Job gives us, so chapter 28 is this poem about the nature of wisdom and how it is that we understand the world around us. So I'm going to give everyone some time in those groups, and then we'll come back together in a few minutes. Okay, I think we're all back now. I hope you're able to find something meaningful from listening to each other. I want to ask Mariam to share something. I know that the way I've been presenting this has been very Jewish-centric. Mariam was able to share the Islamic view of the story of Job and a little bit of an extra piece that exists in Islam that doesn't exist in Judaism that I really loved hearing. So I'm going to ask Mariam to share with the full group.
Hello. So the story of Job we called Ayub, so we call him Prophet Ayub. So every highly regarded man that Allah tested in Quran, we add prophet next to it. So Prophet Ayub, we do believe the same thing as Judaism, that his children was taken away from him, his wealth was taken away from him, and he did have all these diseases that Allah gave it to him. But he was very patient. So we call him Prophet Ayub the patient. So because he was very patient on the test that Allah brought on him. So he was sick for a very long time, and he was not complaining about any of the diseases he had until his wife was assaulted. So he could not handle that. And then he made a prayer to Allah for a cure, and Allah cured him and gave all his wealth and other children's back to him. And one of the famous prayers that most of our as Muslims we make usually when you're sick, we like to, if any problem comes in our life, we like to go and make the same prayers as the prophets did when they come across hardship. So the prayer that Prophet Ayub made when he was sick, so I'm going to go ahead and share that with you. It says, "Verily, distress has seized me, and you are the most merciful of all those who show mercy." So that's one of the prayers that, we make that prayer too. And that's what Prophet Ayub made.
Thank you so much. I really love the learning where ritual pieces come from. In Judaism, it's almost a similar thing. Like the prayer for healing in Judaism also comes from a biblical figure's prayer for healing, right? Moses prayed that his sister Miriam's leprosy would be healed, right? And that became like a Jewish Hebrew prayer for healing, because we know that those words had healing power for a person, for a biblical prophet, and that we hope for the same health for each other now. So I really love those ideas of understandings and beginnings. Jeremy asks, or maybe someone else had asked Jeremy, whether Job is considered a prophet by Jewish folks. My personal understanding is no. He does speak with God, but Job is not tasked with a holy mission. Job is not asked to deliver the word of God to anyone else. It's just kind of dealing with his own personal life. And so he's not included in the book of prophets. He's this other figure. One of the other groups that I visited with had also asked, like, what's where in the timeline is the story supposed to fall? And the thing is that most stories about the prophets, even if they happen while the Israelites are in exile during the Babylonian period, right, those stories still are about the future of the Jewish people and about redemption of the Jewish people. This story is not about that at all, at least not directly, right? There's no future spoken of. There's no instruction really given by God to anyone here. Except to say, when God jumps in, God has very strong words for the people in the story, and not really for anyone else, but we learn it as readers. The narrator thinks that it's important for us to hear that. So after Job lashes out at his friends and stands his ground, another friend shows up named Elihu, who is like not mentioned anywhere else. It's this very strange thing. He like shows up and then disappears pretty quickly. He's younger than the others. Like he announces, like, he kind of starts off by saying, "I've been sitting here quietly listening to the rest of you rant because you're older than me, you're supposedly wiser than me, and I thought that you would know better than I do." And then after he hears Job give this poem about what wisdom actually is, he says, "You know what? I don't care that I'm younger than you. I don't care that I've studied less, because that's not what wisdom is. Like Job has now taught him that that is not what wisdom is. And so he says this, let us decide for ourselves what is just. Let us know among ourselves what is good. There's this idea that like God's not here to tell us, right? Like all of these ideas about the wisdom, like being able to know who or what God is, was not really given to us beyond the laws of God and the stories of how God interacted with others. So we have to base what we do in our lifetime on what we've learned from that. And so we have this kind of like the young up and comer here who just jumps up and he talks for a while. Like while the others like kind of went in and out with each other, he says to the rest of them, sit down and just listen for once in your lives, because I am figuring out right now that you don't know what you're talking about. And I feel like a lot of young people grow up feeling that way, that they hear all this supposed wisdom from elders. And when they find out that, nope, that's not actually how the world works, that they have this moment, this epiphany, and they just have to say it. So that's just an interesting thing to point out. Elihu just stands apart from everybody else in the story. And then we don't have too much time to get into another text study, but I wanted to jump into what happens in chapter 38. And if you want to read it, it's great. This is the moment where God shows up in the form of a tempest, and says quite just matter-of-factly, none of you know what you're talking about, and you need to just stop. We've completely forgotten about Hasatan at this point. He does not show up anywhere in here except in that prologue. God makes a bet to prove that Job would stay faithful, and then we never see Hasatan again. Now, this has become like I said before, it's almost like a trial. Job is put on trial by his friends. Job puts God on trial for doing bad things to a good person. And God shows up with this statement. Like it's one of my favorite lines of the entire scriptures. Where were you when I was forming the earth? What do you know about any of this? You think you know, you have these ideas, and you can sit around and philosophize as much as you want to, but you have not a clue. If we look at, actually, I'll pull it up here so we can look at it together. Chapter. Make this a little bigger for everyone. All right, so this is where God just shows up. Like Elihu has just finished speaking, and God just shows up, and who is this who darkens counsel, speaking without knowledge? And the thing is, because it happens right after Elihu speaks, it sounds like God's responding directly to Elihu. But later at the end, like just to jump ahead a little bit, spoiler alert, God punishes the other three friends, like the first ones to speak, who told Job, obviously you're a bad person, but says nothing about Elihu. Elihu's done. We do not hear his name again. So it may be that Elihu's little refrain was added in after the fact, was kind of like a little bit of post hoc wisdom thrown in there about how a righteous person should feel about this whole situation, but doesn't seem to be part of God's response. So this is really, in the full context, seems like God's responding to the friends and to Job maybe collectively. So here it is. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Speak if you have understanding. So now it's not just about wisdom. Like it's not enough that you have the information. You don't understand a single bit of it. And he asks all these rhetorical questions. Do you know who fixed the dimensions of the world? Do you know when the stars sang together and the divine being shouted for joy? There's like so many great visuals here. Have you ever commanded the day to break, assigned the dawn its place so that it seizes the corners of the earth and shakes the wicked out of it? Like this is just, God is now ranting at these people. And it's like, I am sick and tired of hearing from you. You don't know a single thing about the nature of the world, or why I do what I do, or why I made it the way it is. It's intense. It's really intense. And to share one of my favorite lines from cinema, I think this is what God's saying. It just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. Like, it matters because God created things and God has a reason for doing it, and there's a purpose to this plan, but it doesn't matter whether we understand it or not. So anytime you're sitting around trying to create a philosophy about life and death and what it means to be a good person or a wise person or any of these things, just, you're wasting your time because you're never going to know. It just doesn't matter. And yet we have this really unfortunate history within our own faiths and others within theirs of trying to find purpose and meaning behind why things happen the way they do, which leads us to terrible, terrible, terrible conclusions. I have a couple examples here in the time we have left to just reflect on a little bit. And again, a little bit of a content warning. What I'm about to talk about is a little bit of a downer, because when we're talking about when bad things happen to good people, we got to talk about some bad things. And we're going to talk about some bad people who put the blame in the wrong place. We'll start with a Jewish example. Very recently, Lag BaOmer, it's a Jewish celebration. It just happened a few weeks ago. There was a huge gathering on Mount Meron in Israel where just the crowd, given COVID restrictions itself, should not have been this giant crowd that it was. However, it was a massive crowd. Something happened that caused panic. There was almost like a stampede, and 45 people died. They were trampled by other people, by pious people who considered themselves pious religious people. And like, they were there for a holy purpose, and a lot of people died. And when asked, this specific rabbi, who the Haredi, that's like the ultra Orthodox Jews in Israel, and other places around the world. But specifically, this rabbi, when asked, like, why did God inflict such a tragedy? So again, this question was asked, why did God let this happen? And even worse, why God inflicted? Why did God make this happen? The blame is being put entirely on God for this. Like, God, like, if this happened, then clearly God meant for it to. And so for what reason would it happen? And this rabbi answered that the lesson here is that we should be more observant and women should be more modest. And it's like, how can you think that? Like, in this moment when people are hurting and they're questioning, and it's just like this intense crisis of faith, that's the response. It's really hard. And I will admit that I'm being a little judgmental. I'm being very judgmental in this moment because this is not how I feel. I apologize if anyone here does feel this way. I don't. And I think the lesson of the story of Job is that we're not supposed to feel that way. You're not supposed to sit there and try to put blame on any human beings, on any other thing, and maybe not even blame on God, right? God gave us free will. God gave us the opportunity to make choices, and choices have consequences, right? So here's just an example of, like, why would you feel that way? This rabbi is embodying Job's friends. Clearly, we've done something to deserve this, otherwise it wouldn't have happened. Hurricane Harvey, 2017. Minister Kevin Swanson in Houston. Houston had sinned by having very, very aggressively pro-homosexual mayor. That is the message that Lord Jesus Christ is sending home right now to America. Hurricanes happened because people are gay. All these people died and lost their homes and were put through this torment because homosexuals exist and our culture has allowed for it. This was taken from the Wilson Center, which is connected with the Smithsonian. They were looking at kind of Muslim responses to the COVID outbreak. Conservative Sunni clerics blamed Shiites and atheists for triggering the worldwide pandemic. There's a debate whether the outbreak was divine punishment against non-believers, and the Islamic State, which we know is extreme, blame Shiites. The outbreak was a sign that Shiites should abandon their polytheism. The disease is a painful torment for the crusader nations of the West. And then we also know that entire religious groups themselves have been blamed by other religious groups, specifically Hindus in India blaming Muslims for bringing the pandemic to their borders. There was people attacking each other in the streets, like Muslims were being lashed like by just people because they were being given the blame. Same thing happened in England, right? The UK Parliament even like shut down a particular part of London that is a heavy Muslim community, and kind of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge gave blame on the London outbreak to this specific community where majority Muslims were living. And like this was happening all over the world. Like people were they were trying to find something to blame, and all they could think was to blame other people and think just these are religious leaders blaming people for either not following their own religion enough, or blaming other religious groups, or blaming non-believers, right? When, at least in the Jewish and Christian Bible, and from what I've learned today from what's in the Quran as well, that's not how we're supposed to react to tragedy, right? We know from many other parts of our scriptures that we're supposed to reach out to each other, and we're supposed to connect to each other, and we're supposed to lift up the fallen and heal the sick and give shelter to the homeless, right? Those are things that God has directly commanded us to do. God has not commanded us to place blame. God has not told us that we're supposed to find a scapegoat. So that's the lesson from Job that I took, and I hope everyone here is able to walk away with. I'm sorry that we had to end on these kind of downer moments, but I want this to be a moment of inspiration that we can take with us and say, we are not going to place blame on human beings for things that are out of our control. And whatever personal gripe we might have with God because of it is personal, right? That's a conversation that we need to have internally and with the divine, however we see it. It's a very personal thing, and we can't go around blaming each other, and we can't gaslight each other into thinking that we weren't faithful enough to our religion, or we weren't modest enough, we weren't observant enough, we weren't pure or pious enough. Let's support each other. Let's be there for each other. I think that's really what Tri-Faith is here for. So again, I think that's our hour. I'm happy to stick around and have more of a conversation if anyone has questions or anything like that. That's what I want to leave you with.
Thank you very much, Ben. I think a lot of
Thanks,
people
Ben.
found a lot of depth to this conversation. And also thank you to everyone who was able to participate in the conversations. I do also want to note here that we have a survey that we would love for you to fill out. And also the homework that I hear is watch Gaslight. There's a movie called Gaslight. That's where the term comes from. And it's an old thriller movie, basically, 1940s, I think. Definitely watch that to understand that better too. But yeah, so we'll keep the room open until no one has any other questions, or until Ben has to go. So thank you all again so much, and hope to see you next time.
So you mentioned the movie Gaslight. It's actually a remake, because there was the movie Gaslight that's known from the 40s is from the United States, but the original movie was in England. And as part of the qualifications for making the second movie, they kind of got rid of all the copies of the first movie. So there's kind of like this sub-Gaslight genre of the idea that the Gaslight movie was didn't really exist, the first one.
Oh, that's pretty funny.
So that was even kind of a weird subset to that. But yeah, the original Gaslight movie was actually a British movie a few years before the American one in the 40s.
Classic. Jean?
Well, I just had a thought. I was in an interfaith group about a week ago, and the Christian minister in that group said something like, my role isn't to convince or convert, but to care. And I think that's kind of the message that I took from what Ben was saying and what we all talked about today.
I really love that.
Did anyone else have any questions for Ben or any other comments that they wanted to share with the group?
Yeah, so I kind of have a question, and I know we talked a little bit about it, and I feel like different people have different interpretations, but in your mind, Ben, since you're the presenter today, what is the ultimate lesson that we are supposed to take away from the story of Job?
This may not be about Job specifically, but taking the themes of Job and putting into context with other Jewish scriptures, at least. Judaism doesn't talk about an afterlife very much, I think is an important thing to say up front. And the idea of living a good life is not meant for any kind of eternal reward. And there's no fear of eternal punishment for not being a good person either. The only thing we know for certain is that we exist here in this world, in this time, and the best we can do is treat the world well, treat the other people within it well, and be good to ourselves. Worrying about what comes next does not get us very far, right? So a friend of mine, I was in a Jewish text study about this recently, and someone said, compared it to if you spend the entire party worrying about getting into the after party, then you miss out on all the fun of the party itself. And I think like that's a Jewish teaching that I care very much about, and not to discredit any other beliefs. There's definitely plenty of Jewish philosophies about the afterlife. I think the moral of Job is, again, doesn't matter. Like it does, it will matter. It will matter later. It doesn't matter so much right now. Our responsibility now is to be good to each other and to the world that we have right now. Let's live in the moment while also understanding that there's a future coming after us. And right, that's also this idea, Elihu, the younger of the speakers, who like jumps in and just says, we have to do what we perceive as good. And that's the best we can do right now. I think that's a really important takeaway. And that's personally how I want to live it.
Awesome, thank you.
I'm with you.
I kind of came up with something else a little bit too from the end bit that the second part you discussed with where God comes in and it's basically like, what do you know? It's maybe a reminder that most of what we get from anywhere, from biblical scholars, rabbinical sources, from all the way through, it's all people with opinions. And as we can see in this part of the Tanakh, like people with opinions aren't always the best sources for things. And sometimes when things start to feel really bad and messed up around you, that maybe you should be more concerned, be more careful with whose opinions you're taking, because sometimes those opinions could be part of the problem too.
Yeah. Check your sources, I guess, is an important takeaway there. There's a a Jewish wisdom piece that says, "Who is wise? The one who learns from everyone else." And we have to fill our own space with as many different voices and opinions as we can. And if we're seeing it on social media right now, right? People are more and more cornered into specific areas of the internet where they're hearing only one very specific viewpoint. And usually those viewpoints are meant to scare us. They're meant to control us. They're meant to gaslight us into feeling and thinking and believing a certain way about other people and other ideas. And if we allow ourselves to get there, then we're not going to come out of it as good people.
Ben, I'd like to thank you particularly for the various contexts you provided throughout the session. That to me is very, very worthwhile and enlightening. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, any other questions? All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. We will have the next one up on the website soon. Just finalizing the guest here, and I want to thank you again, Ben, for doing such a great job. I think this was very enlightening. I hope to see you all soon, and make sure you pay attention to your email. You'll get the recording and the survey again through that. All right. Well, thank you again.